Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 240 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We'll be taking a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and using to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today, I'm actually quite excited about today. We've got a mod that hasn't come back for a little bit. You got Scott with a couple of frogs. And then we've got a couple very weird additions, not actually like, not traditional animals or, my traditional content. I thought I'd be a little bit wacky and do some interesting stuff and talk about some other things. I didn't know that I'd be using Know Your Meme for Planet Zoo mod spotlights, but here we are. This is the time that we're living in, but I'm really excited to get stuck into some of the mods that we've got today. So we're going to be starting off today with Scott's frogs. We've got two frogs from him today. The first one will be the Coronated tree frog. So let's have a look at these guys. Exhibit camera. There we go. There's a little guy. Where's this little guy? There we go. So this is the coronated tree frog. It's also known as the spiny-head tree frog, the spiny-headed tree frog, or the crowned hyla. So it's got a few different names, but basically any sort of those variations of those. So these guys are a species of frog in the family Hylandidae, and they have a very patchy distribution, or spotty distribution across Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, and into southern Mexico. Previously, it was its own monotypic genus of Anathenta. It was actually transferred to the genus Tripotion in 2018. So these guys are actually quite a large frog. So this species is relatively large, with a snapped event length of between 5.8 to 8 centimeters, or about 2.3 to 3.1 inches. So pretty big. Has numerous sharp, pointy projections on the head and dorsal shape of its skull. So you can kind of see it going on there. Very interesting. Hence where it gets its common name on, this coronated frog, it was like it's got a little crown on its head. The skin on its head is fused to the skull, and the trypanium is very large. So that's very interesting as well. The legs are long and slender, and the digits have adhesive discs on their tips. Pretty much, you can see that they're very similar to other types of frog. There's not much of a difference going on there. Let's see if we can find another one and have a look. There you can see those on that. That's perfect. Beautiful little guy. The legs are long and slender. The digital tips, mentioned that. The dorsal surface is pale brown or grey. So let's see if we can get one a little bit of light. There we go. Perfect. It's like pale grey there. Or brown with dark markings, and the flanks are darker brown or black, with the colours being separated by a narrow white band. As you can see, there's little bands there. So this species is active at night, where the males call. They go bop, bop, bop. And it's more likely to be heard than seen. The male calls from beside a temporary water body, a water-filled hollow in a tree, or the water caught into the rosette of a bromeliad, where the female lays her eggs. The developing tadpoles will be safe from large predators such as fish, but there is a dearth of suitable food in these minute pools, so there's not a lot of food in these pools. So the female frog will actually solve this problem by periodically visiting the locations, and then lays unfertilized eggs into these to feed the tadpoles, which is quite interesting as well. There's a lot of frogs that do this. The tadpoles stimulate her to do this by nibbling at her belly, and up to 16 tadpoles have been found in a single transient pool. So this is a very interesting species. They occur in lowland forests and mountain habitats. In humid forests of about 95 to 2,000 meters, or 310 to 6,560 feet above sea level. However, in at least Costa Rica and Panama, it can be common in young secondary growth forests and coffee plantations far from the forest. Breeding takes place in tree holes, and it is threatened by severe disturbance, clearance, and transformation of its original habitat into open areas. It is, though, present in a number of protected areas, and a captive insurance population is bred and maintained at the El Valle Amphibian Conservation Center in Panama, the Atlanta Botanical Gardens in the US, and a few other AZA zoos. So they are maintained in captivity. But yeah, very, very cool. Really cool animal that we get to look at. Another cool froggy. I love Scott doing all of the exhibit animals. Really, really comes out amazing. This little goober. I'm a big fan of this goober. I'm a big fan. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. So we got another frog. So, not one frog, but two frog. Here we got the Amazon milk frog. So let's see if we can find one in the light. We like to find them in the light. active. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Look at this goofy little goober. I might find one on the ground. That one's a little bit goofiest. Try this one. There we go. This is probably the best we're going to get. Okay. So this is the Mission golden-eyed tree frog, which is another name for the Amazon milk frog. Or the other name is just milk frog. Scientific name is Trachycephalus rucinsificus, or something like that. These guys are a species of quite large arboreal frog from the Amazon rainforest. Who could have guessed that? In South America. It's sometimes referred to as the blue milk frog due to a sticky milk-like substance that it produces when it feels threatened. It was first discovered along the Maracana River in Brazil, and it was previously put in within the genus Soralphus, but then was synonymized with Trachycephalus. So these are another quite large species of frog. They get about 2.5 to 4 inches in length, so even bigger than the coronated frogs. About 6.4 to 10 centimeters in length, with adult frogs being light grey in colour with brown and black banding, while juveniles exhibit quite stronger contrasts. As they age, their skin does develop a slightly bumpy texture, and the blood tends to be a shade of blue, which can be shown to their skin, mostly boldly in the mouth area and the toe pads. So the milk was what they refer to as not actual milk. It's not like a mammal's milk. It's a milky fluid that they excrete when they are threatened. So when they're threatened, they'll excrete that. So these frogs, or Mission golden-eyed tree frogs, are found in the tropical rainforest of Brazil, South America, and populations can be found in Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, Guyana, and Colombia, where they live in vegetated areas that extends over permanent, slow-moving water bodies. And in captivity, they actually can really be found in captivity. I love snake discovery. They have a bunch there. They're relatively easy to care for, but they require a lot of space, humidity, and a regular enclosure maintenance to ensure that it stays healthy. In the wild, they could live in temperatures between 21 to 30 degrees, and thus captivity should have, and when they're captive, they should have a similar temperature. And these frogs are completely carnivorous and thrive on a diet of insects in captivity. So that's quite cool. So we'll have a look and see what we've got in the Zoopedia there. Yeah, see if we've got any cool facts. We mentioned that. Over vegetation. Tadpoles feed on material and fertilizer. Yeah, that's pretty much the same. Yeah, very, very cool little guys. Look at that. Look at that little goober. That's very cute. Look at that one there gliding. I'm actually a big fan of these frogs. Scott, Planet Zoo, you did an awesome job. Always a big fan of that. So we moved on to the exhibits. We've got an animal that doesn't even move, or we don't even know really what's an animal. This is a scenery thing, but I thought that these guys interest me so much that I think they were worth a shout out in the video. So this is by Great Cakes Mod, who always loves to do this kind of stuff, all these very interesting ones. But these are Prototaxites. So if you are not a fan of the early Paleozoic, you probably not have heard these guys. But these are very interesting. So the Prototaxites, they are an extinct genus of large macroscopic eukaryote dating to the late Silurian until the late Devonian. So a very interesting animal or thing, a living thing. Eukaryote is probably the best word. Prototaxites form large trunk-like structures up to about 1 meter tall. Or up to 1 meter wide and reach up to 8 meters tall. So about 3 feet wide and up to 26 feet tall. So that's taller than a giraffe. And it's made up of tiny interwoven tubercles, about 20 micrometers in diameter, which made it by far the largest land-dwelling organism of the time. It's like the sequoia of this Silurian. Though its taxonomy has been really, really in debate, it was long considered to be a fungus, but that's been ongoing. And the exact relationship to modern fungus lineages has been uncertain. It was also certainly a perennial organism that grew over multiple years, and several ecologies have been proposed, including what is stratigraphic like many modern fungi, so basically a decompositioner, or that it was a lichenized autotroph, so basically it was like a lichen and was like a plant, it photosynthesized. But in 2026, researchers compared fossils of a Prototaxite species with other eukaryote fossils from the same location and found them to be structurally and chemically distinct, suggesting that Prototaxites are not a fungus at all, but actually their own kind of unique, undescribed kingdom of eukaryotes. So eukaryotes is basically anything with a cell wall. So anemones, elephants, humans, crocodiles, and everything right up until pretty much, like fungi and sequoia trees and all that. That's eukaryote, and this is likely its whole new kingdom. So that's very interesting. So I mentioned diameter up to about a meter and reaching up to about 29 feet tall. They are remnants of by far the largest organisms discovered from that period. And viewed from afar, they look very superficially like tree trunks. A great example of convergent evolution. That they spread spreading slightly near the base, and they have like a root system. And infilled casts of what they represent by the roots are actually quite common in early Devonian strata. And these growth rings you can also see embedded, sometimes containing embedded plant material, that suggested that these guys actually grew in layers, and they had like a tree trunk-like structure, which represented, and they also had these, which represented the fruiting body or the sporophore of the fungus, or would have been filled by a mycelium, which is kind of what we think when we're back when it was a mushroom or fungus. The fossils itself have narrow tube-like structures, as we mentioned, very, very small. And these would have been the interior walls, and a trait that's typically only found. So they have a trait called a predophore, which contains a germ pore. And that germ pore is usually only found in red algae or fungi. So, very interesting there. And the similarity to these tubes to early plants suggests that they may have represented leaves of the Prototaxites, but this hypothesis has never found the connection, although this may be a consequence of them after death. So there are some reconstructions that make them look very superficially tree-like. That's kind of an interpretation we don't really know, but this is kind of one of the more, I would say, the more realistic interpretations, or least speculative interpretations. So very interesting. So they were first discovered in 1843. It was not until 14 years later until J.W. Dawson, a Canadian scientist, studied these fossils. And he described them as partially rotten giant conifers, containing the remnants of fungi that had been decomposing on them. But that was not disputed until 1872, where rival scientist W. Cathers ridiculed the idea, and he named them the Prototaxites, which loosely translates to the first U, and insisted that the name Neonetomophycus, or stringy alga, be adopted, which would move strongly against scientific convention. Dawson fought adamantly to defend the original interpretation until the studies of the microstructure made it clear that his position was untenable, which he promptly attempted to rename it himself to Nyctophilon, or stringy plant, and denying with great vehemence that it ever been considered a tree. Despite these political attempts to rename the genus, the rules of botanical nomenclature means that Prototaxites, however inappropriate names means, remains in use today. Same situation with Basilosaurus. Basilosaurus was considered a reptile until they found out, it's actually an early whale. So that is taxonomy for you. Despite actually the overwhelming evidence that it grew on land, some interpretations, like Cather's interpretation that it was a giant marine algae, and then that was challenged in 1919, and had been too quick to rule out the possibility it was a fungus. And then it kind of remained a mystery, and it was not until 2001 until there was a paper that actually tried to put Prototaxites in its place, and they kind of looked at the morphology and concluded they were a fungus. The idea was received with disbelief. It's like, how could it be a fungus? And everyone's like, what the heck? They detected a highly variable range of carbon isotopes in the range of these specimens. Autotrophs living at the same time draw on the same kind of source of carbon. So the inconsistent ratio suggested that they did not photosynthesize, and they deduced that they fed on rather a lot of substrates. So very interesting. So they didn't photosynthesize like a plant. And the other research suggested they may have been rolled up bundles of liverworts, but no one really believed that. A similar genus as well, Nemestotocon, was suggested to be an exoplanetary, seemed to be a fungus. Though in 2019 there was a paper describing a new species from the Middle Ordovician, which made it the earliest known appearance of the species. There's another 22 paper that suggests that it was a fungal ribosome that grew on its side or likely underground, which opposed this traditional view of it being upright. But then the 2026 paper kind of came over and destroyed that. The assemblage in Scotland is distinct from having any other organisms, including fungi, due to lacking chitin, key structural of extant fungi. The paper additionally found that the medullary spots in the Prototaxis tatae was comprised of highly dense fine branching and identified some tubules and internal banding. The author suggests that both of these features are distinct from anything known found in extant fungi, and may suggest it's completely its own thing. So that's kind of the latest on Prototaxis, which is very interesting. But in the historical context, the research term reconstructs them as a branchless kind of columnar structure, which is how they're interpreted here. It was the tallest living organism of its day by far, with the next largest Cooksonia being a small kind of moss, little 6 centimeter little thing. And it likely towered over these forests, like the first forests in Earth's history. And invertebrates were the only land-dwelling animals at the time that were multicellular. Prototaxites or Prototaxis would have used these tall columnar structures to spread spores. Alternatively, if they could photosynthesize, the height would have been great for them to be able to collect light. And the presence of biomolecules in the algae, often associated with algae, suggests they may have been symbiotic or would have been afflicted by parasitic algae, or even maybe making its essence a huge lichen, or even suggesting that it was an alga itself. But yeah, yes, I mentioned the variability in the isotopes, so it doesn't suggest that. And Prototaxites mycelium or strands were fossilized as they invaded the tissues of vascular plants. And in turn, there is evidence of animals inhabiting these, with the maze of tubes have been found in some specimens, with the organism regrowing into the voids, leading to speculation that the extinction of Prototaxites may have been from such activity. However, evidence of arthropod boreholes in Prototaxis have been found from the early to late Devonian, suggesting these organisms would have dealt with this for millions of years, so they would have originally been dealing with a lot of little invertebrates and stuff like that boring into them. That would have been quite a boring existence, you could say. Intriguingly, these boreholes actually appeared in Prototaxis long before plants developed a structurally equivalent woody stem, and it's possible that these borers transferred to plants when they evolved. So it's likely that all the wood-boring animals that we see today kind of got their first adaptations from these guys. And Prototaxis became extinct in late Devonian as vascular plants kind of rose to dominance and they became outcompeted. But yeah, very, very cool. I love this. I would love someone to create like a really cool diorama for the Devonian. Very, very cool. Love to see this. So next up, we've got, this is by Great Cakes Mod, by the way. Next up, we've got Jimothy. We all love Jimothy. We got plenty of Jimothy. We got a Jimothy and a Jimothy. So I gotta say, this is so funny. I love Jimothy. I love the memes, so I had to put this in. So very, very cool mod done by Leaf. Leaf returning for a little bit of a joke mod. Have no issue with that. So this is the Jimothy the Raccoon. So this isn't referred to a species. It's not a species of like messed up looking raccoon. This refers to a particular memed individual named Jimothy, which is an incredibly fitting name. Let's see if we can find a boy, so we can see it looks like Jimothy. Oh, that's not what I wanted to click on. Come on, mate. Did it again. Third time. Alright, let's just click it on this. Let's pick a terrier. You can be Jimothy. You can see him climbing down there. So Jimothy was a wild raccoon with short spine syndrome who lived in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood. His short spine, the syndrome that he has, the short spine syndrome, makes him look particularly rounded and short compared to normal raccoons. So he looks very different, as you can kind of see there, very, very short. He went viral in July 2026 due to his short spine syndrome, which many found cute and peculiar. And videos of Jimothy has spread around social media, inspiring works of fan art, memes, and viral coverage. In the media, with streamers and social media stars, just making lots of memes of him. There was a World of Warcraft thing, lots of different memes and stuff going on about him. And he also they had added him as an Easter egg. If you look up Jimothy, there'll be a little Jimothy animation running around looking for him. So very cute. So where did Jimothy kind of come from? So on July 14th, 2026, Instagram user Kiana Hall posted a video of a raccoon with short spine syndrome named Jimothy running in her backyard. The post description reads, for our 13th anniversary, Bahan and I were graced with the presence of Jimothy the Raccoon with short spine syndrome. Praise Jimothy, of course, with the raccoon emoji. This video gained over 398,000 likes in 6 days. So what is this raccoon suffering from? Short spine syndrome is a rare deformity that happens when an animal's vertebrae are fused or compressed during development. It's not always painful for the animal, but it does always cause mobility issues because, it doesn't have most of its spine. And it can harm the animal's ability to survive in the wild. Over time, the condition can lead to pain. I'm sure you've seen videos before of dogs. There's also a rescued bear with this syndrome. But yeah, it's funny to see it in a raccoon. So it's hypothetically can happen in pretty much every animal with a spine. In terms of its spread, Hall's video of Jimothy went viral and it was reposted numerous times all over the internet. And this inspired a wave of other videos of Jimothy along with fan art celebrating him. On July 17th, account DubSetX posted another video sighting of Jimothy, which garnered over 25,000 likes and 1,600 reposts in 3 days. So another Jimothy sighting. Another one actually found a video of Jimothy when he was a little baby, and it was taken in their backyard. And he was a very cute little baby, to be honest. If you look up the videos, he's very cute. So we can have a look at the babies here and kind of compare. Oh, no. So this is what baby Jimothy looked like, and he was actually very, very cute. And there's also been some sketches and stuff like that. In 19th, there was another, there's a bunch of different memes kind of comparing to him as well. Yeah, very, very cool little guy. How can you not love Jimothy? Very, very cool. Anyway, we're going to be moving on. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, next up. We got Great Cakes mod dominating the rest of the monster spotlight. So Jimothy was done by Leaf, but this wild ass, the European wild ass, was done by Great Cakes mod. So let's see if we can have a look at you. There you go. Certainly a great ass. I love it. So this is the European wild ass, or Equus hydrumus, or Equus hymosus hydrurus, or the hydrutine, is a extinct equid from the middle Pleistocene to the late Holocene of Europe and West Asia, and possibly also lived in North Africa, and is a member of the subgenus Anasis, and is closely related to the living Asiatic wild ass. And the specific name, Hydroduntus, means from Ontario, hydrodum in Latin. So in comparison to the Asiatic wild ass, which as we mentioned is kind of close relative, its muzzle is shorter, much shorter and somewhat proportionally wider. And its palate is also elongated, and the nasal notch is shorter. The teeth are also relatively small compared to the skull size, and very hypsodont or high-crowned. And the shafts of the metacarpal and metatarsal bones are also more robust. So kind of similar traits that you kind of see in a lot of these Pleistocene things, but not too drastically different. Again, it's just sometimes considered a subspecies of the Asiatic wild ass. Mostly depends on who you ask. So let's carry on. Oh my gosh. Evolutionary history. So these guys first appeared in the fossil record about 600,000 years ago during the Middle Pleistocene. And in the late Pleistocene, they were once widespread throughout much of Western Eurasia, from the Middle East to Europe, especially across the Mediterranean, with fossils being found in Italy, Turkey, Spain, France, and Portugal. And on the east side of its range apparently stretched at least to Volga and Iran, and north it reached the North Sea, and Germany, and the British Isles, and some suggest that it's even managed to make it to northern Africa. Its range, though fragmented, it survived the last glacial maximum and survived into the Holocene, and its range contracted further, persisting in small regions of southern Europe, such as Danube River Valley or the southern Italian peninsula and southern France, and possibly survived latest in Europe around the Danube until about 4,000 to 3,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, because it's in 3000 BC. So you do the maths. It was historically suggested that the species survived in southern Iberian Peninsula into the Paleolithic period from a phalange found in the Caujos and Veda. However, later researchers said it came from a mule and not from these guys. And thus there's no unambiguous specimen of the European wild ass in the Iberian Peninsula that dates later than the end of the Pleistocene. Suggestions that the hydrone survived into a historical period and is to be described in the written records of the Zerbo would have been a total death of osteological finds are unfounded. So there's not really any evidence. But it likely survived into West Asia, with reported dates of the region ranging between 1500 to 500 BCE, so lived quite recently. And the exact systematics of the position of where this guy is unclear, but recent genetic and morphological analyses do suggest that it is a close relative of the Asiatic wild ass. A 2017 genetic study suggests it was a subspecies, closer to the Kur than the Persian Ogna. However, a study of the full mitochondrial and nuclear genetics, which of the specimens from like early mid-first millennium BC, which represents the youngest known remains of the species, suggests that all modern wild ass lineages are more closely related to each other than the European wild ass. And they split between the Hydrontines and the Asiatic wild asses occurred between 800 to 600,000 years ago. So most likely were their own species. Analysis of their nuclear genome suggested there had been gene flow during the Holocene from the European wild ass to the Middle Eastern Asiatic wild asses. So there was hybridization, but it was very much its own thing. It was kind of in between the African wild asses and the Syrian and Eurasian wild asses. So very interesting. So it's ecology. We'll have a look at the babies. I want to have a look at the babies for a while because I like looking at the babies. Babies are good for looking at. So the evidence shows that the European ass favoured semi-arid steppe conditions and had a preference for temperate climates, although it was found in cool or cold climates. It may have retreated to warmer locales during the coldest periods, although its relatively short muzzle indicates an adaptation for these cold conditions. It prefers open biotypes between scrubland, favoured by true horses, and grasslands favoured by bovids. It is believed to have shared its habitat with species such as the woolly rhino, and was considered quite an ecologically important part of the ecosystem known as the Mammoth steppe, where it filled a niche equivalent to the African wild ass or zebra in the African savanna. Dental Weir's analysis of specimens from the Iberian Peninsula suggests it was primarily a grazer that was thought to have been flexible and would have occasionally browsed or seasonally consumed browse. Dental microware evidence from late Pleistocene specimens from the Cimmerian Peninsula likely revealed its diet was mainly grasses as well. And there are remains of European wild asses being found in cave hyena dens, which suggested that they were likely preyed upon by these animals. Which makes sense, you know? Have a look at you. So in terms of their relationship with humans, they are depicted quite a bit in Paleolithic art, in cave paintings and engravings from France, as well as Neolithic pottery from Anatolia. Remains found with cart marks and or archaeological sites spanning from the Paleolithic to the youngest known remains in the Iron Age. The species range into Chimera, Italy, the Arabian Peninsula, and Anatolia. And they were likely hunted by both modern humans and Neanderthals, which makes a lot of sense, That's good feed for a person, especially when you're living out there in the hard steppe. Got to step up. Be another great cakes mod, always a winner, winner, chicken dinner. And I'm really excited to talk about this one. This is a really fun one. We've got another elephant for a change, but this is actually the dwarf mammoth. So this is the Sardinian dwarf mammoth, or Mammothus laramidomondi, or something like that. So let's have a look at you. You're very, very interesting looking, and I'm very impressed that they managed to do this great cakes mod. It looks really, really awesome. So we get lots of dwarf elephants. We've all heard of the Sicilian dwarf elephant, but there also are dwarf mammoths that don't often get quite as much talked about. The most famous one is obviously the Channel Island mammoths, but this is the dwarf mammoth, Mammothus laramidomondi, or the Sardinian dwarf mammoth. So these are a species of dwarf mammoth that lived from the middle to late Pleistocene, so between 450,000 to about 40,000 years ago, and it lived on the island of Sardinia in the Mediterranean. It was estimated to be about 1.4 meters or 4.6 feet tall, and remains have been found across the western part of the island. So these guys are not really known from much. They're only known from a small number of remains, and that include a fragmentary partial skeleton and isolated finds of other bones. Of the few molars, only one represents the rearmost tooth, which is about 13 centimeters long and 6.9 centimeters wide, with at least 11 rings on the enamel. The humerus itself reaches about a length of 45 centimeters or 18 inches, and the few discovered tusk fragments exhibit only a small maximum diameter of about 3.5 centimeters or 1.4 inches, and the length of the femur indicates a shoulder height of about 1.4 meters, and weight estimates range from about 420 kilograms or about 930 pounds to 1.6 tons or just over 3,600 pounds. And the small size of M. laramodi is attributed to what happens with a lot of other large animals when they get to islands, like other elephants or other fentids. Thinking what other animals as well. Some dinosaurs have exhibited. Lots of those large animals, rhinos, hippos, things like that, when they get on islands, they encounter what's called insular dwarfism, where large animals reach these small islands and they shrink because they don't have to deal with predators. Also, lots of changes in resources. There's a lot less food to go around for a big animal, and they tend to shrink. So, due to lack of predators and the smaller food supply. So the holotype of this mammoth comes from a partial skeleton discovered during the late 19th century of the Gusano Passo Hill near Gosa in southern Sardinia, which was actually excavated as part of railway construction. So that's the male. Let's look at the female over here. Clearly hasn't got quite a big tusks, but still looks very pretty. Big fan of that. So most finds of M. laramodi were discovered on the west coast and in the western part of the island, and they mainly comprise of individual finds, but also associated skeletal elements. The most important fossils are from the Futana Mountain of Momerenta, a quarry south-southwest of Gonsena in the valley of Rio Moimenta, where it has already been discovered at the end of the 19th century. These fossils are embedded in the Futana Montero lineup, which is a sedimentary formation that is located below a strata of rock in the unit of colobolomites. And this rock formation is widely spread across the west coast of Sardinia and is generally attributed to the last interglacial period that bears northern Europe, the northern Alpine region, the term Armenia. So that's between 126,000 to 115,000 years ago. The finds include mainly elements of the spine and musculoskeletal system, so among other things, a full foot, a nearly complete hand, high humerus and ulna, as well as the remnants of tusks. All discoveries most likely belong to a single individual. Other finds known from the Salva Condoni de Sinas near Orsanto, where a molar tooth was actually found and deposited before the Amentian sediments, as well as initial molar that was actually larger from the Upper Pleistocene, so maybe an ancestor. So in terms of classification, it's not too different from other mammoths. Its closest living relative is the Asian elephant. The occurrence of this mammoth in late Middle Pleistocene marks descent from the woolly mammoth rather unlikely. So it didn't come from the more famous woolly mammoth. It's likely it either came from the steppe mammoth, which was lived in the continent and likely was a ancestor. And the steppe mammoth's molars possessed only 11 ridges, which is a feature much more archaic than the woolly mammoth, which has 26 ridges. So the Crete pygmy mammoth also exists, and they're the only known dwarf mammoths from the islands of the Mediterranean, which were otherwise occupied by Elephas, Paleoloxodons. So, as you mentioned, like Paleoloxodon falconeri, which is not technically true anymore, but that really small species, we've covered that before, they lived on other islands. So somewhat populated by Paleoloxodon, some were populated by mammoths, which is very interesting too. The remains of the Junipasso Hill, originally named as Elephas mentalentus, and then they were first probably described in 1883, who named these Elephas laramori, and then he saw a clear link between the southern mammoth, Mammoth meridialis, and then called it Elephas meridialis due to similarities. The remains were then found in the quarry and now kept in the National History Museum of Basel, where Major studied them. And because of new tooth finds since the mid-20th century, its close connections to mammoths became clear, and allowing the name Mammothus laramorphae to prevail. And then, a result of the adaptation, it was actually amended to Mammothus laramodi, which is currently the valid scientific name. And the name itself honors Sardinian general and naturalist Alberto La Mamona, who had already, in 1858, investigated the fossils of the area. So very, very cool to honor someone. We love that. So the origin of the species is not particularly clear. We don't know exactly when it came from or when it evolved. The earliest finds are from the Middle Pleistocene, so it's thought to have colonized the island about 450,000 years ago. This colonization was likely due to glacial period, where the global sea levels were much lower, and the continental ice sheets and the animals could reach the islands by swimming. Securely dated tusks, remnants found in the sandstone near Angero, was thought to be about 100,000 years old and lived during the early late Pleistocene. A partial tibia, likely referable to the species, was found in northwestern Sardinia and was suggested to date between 57 and 29,000 years ago, though the bones were found out of stratigraphic context, and the date is based on correlation between the matrix structure and the beach deposits, which is very interesting as well. So, a little bit about the environment this guy lived in. They would have lived in a very interesting environment with all sorts of different animals. I'm not going to show you the babies because they're just baby Sumatran elephants, but I really love this mod. I think that's really cool. So, during the Middle Late Pleistocene, Corsia and Sardinia had their own highly endemic faunas, which, beside the mammoth that lived there, included a giant species of rat, another vole, the Sanduna pike, a shrew, a mole, a dhole. I kind of like that. The giant mustelid, Enihydrus, so I think it's giant otter. Three species of otter, and another one that's Enihydrus, which is just a normal, like a weasel type thing. 3 species of otter, which is very impressive, and a deer. So yeah, very interesting, distinct fauna. Definitely worth looking into. Very, very cool. Big fan. Very, very cool. All right. So we're going to move on to our last Great Cakes mod. We've had a really, really good run, and this one's a really amazing one. I'm genuinely impressed with how this one's come out. We have got the everyone's favourite funky-looking lemur, the II. And I have to say, Great Cakes mod did a really great job representing how weird the species looks. Very, very impressed, especially with the hair. So the II, or Dundrobatopa madagascarensis. These guys are a long-fingered lemur or stripshrine primate that is native to Madagascar, with rodent-like teeth and that perpetually grow, and a special thin middle finger that it uses to grab grubs and larvae out of tree trunks. So in terms of we're going to talk about its entomology. So the genus Dendrobatura was named after French naturalist Louis-Jean-Marie de Botton, by his student, which was Antenne Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire in 1795. Initially, he wanted to call it Scolopagus, which means a worm eater, and in terms of eating habits, but he decided against it because he was uncertain about the AI's habits, and whether other related species might eventually be discovered. So the French naturalist Pierre Sabet first used of the vernacular name II in 1782. We described the illustration of the lemur, also called the long-fingered lemur, by English zoologist George Shaw in 1800, did not stick. According to the name II comes from criminalization and denotation, but American paleontologist actually suggests that the name resembles the name of Malagasy, so what it looks like in Malagasy name, the Hai or Hai or Hei, which refers to the animal and is used on the island. So that seems to be where it got its name from, the II. So due to its derived morphology, the classification of the II has been debated quite a bit. The possession of continuously growing incisors parallels those of rodents, leading early naturalists to mistakenly classify the II as rodents, as a squirrel, due to its toes, hair colouring, and tail. However, it's also similar to felines and head shape, ears, and nostrils, and all that. But very interesting animal. Let's see if we can find the other one. What's the other one doing? You're just sleeping right now. You're both sleeping. Of course you are. Let's see which one gets up first. Don't worry, we won't worry about that. However, though, molecular research is conducted, so the classification within their primates were uncertain, and they were originally thought to be a highly derived member of the Indri family, so another group of big lemurs, and basally diverging branch from the Sepshrine, or wet-nosed monkeys, which includes the lemurs, and intermediate relation of all living primates. In 1931, they actually put them under the infraorder Chromophortes, which was a sister group to other Sepshrines. But however, molecular research suggested that these guys are the most basally diverging lemur, so they're the earliest kind of most derived, most basal splitting lemur, so very different from other lemurs. The most parsimonious explanation is that all lemurs are derived from a single ancestor that arrived from Africa to Madagascar during the Paleogene. And similarities between IIs and several African primates, such as Plesiopeithus and Poropoto, has led to alternate theories that the ancestors of the II actually colonized Madagascar separately from other lemurs. So it's likely there was multiple lineages of lemurs that got to Madagascar, and the II just seemed to be the most basal of them. In 2008, Russell, Minimer, and Cosgroves and others ignored addressing higher-level taxonomy by defining lemurs as monophyletic and containing the 5 living families, including Dipinodonidae. And further evidence also suggests that the II belonged to the superfamily Lemuroidea, can be inferred by the presence of a pistol bulbae encasing the ossicles of the ear. And they also are similar to lemurs in their shorter back legs. So we definitely think that they were a type of lemur. And as we mentioned, there also was a prehistoric giant species, Robusta, which would have gone extinct about 1,000 years ago. Probably not too different from the modern one. So here we've got a full-grown II. They reach typically about 60 centimeters or 2 feet in length, with a tail longer than the body. The species has an average head-to-body length of about 34 to 43 centimeters, or about 14 to 17 inches, plus a tail that's about 56 to 61 centimeters, or about 22 to 24 inches, and can weigh about 2 kilograms. Young II are typically a silver color, and on their front, and have a stripe down their back. However, as IIs reach maturity, their bodies will become completely dark and covered in thick fur, and are typically not one solid color. On the head and back, the ends are typically tipped with white, while the rest of the body is a yellow or brown color, so you can see that going on there. Among the II's kind of signature traits are its fingers. So you can see it's got a very large third finger there, quite well represented. That large third finger, which is much thinner than the others, is used for extracting bugs and grubs from out of trees, and he uses the hooked nail. These fingers are quite unique in the animal kingdom, as they possess a ball and socket mediocarpophalangeal joint. So it's a very unique joint, which can reach the throat through its nostril, and is used for picking one's nose and eating mucus harvested from inside the nose. So they're really good at picking their nose. The eye has also evolved a 6th digit, a pseudo thumb, to aid in gripping. So they use that big third finger to eat snot and bugs in the trees. The complex geometry of ridges on the inner surface of the II's ears actually allow it to focus on not only echolocation signals by tapping its finger, but also passively listening by other sounds produced by prey. These ridges can be regarded as the acoustic equivalent of a fencer lens, and can be seen in a large variety of unrelated animals, such as the Elasogalago, bad-eared foxes, mouse lemurs, and a lot of other animals. They also have 2 nipples located in the region of the groin, which is very weird for mammal primates, because mostly it's up, well, like us, they're up near the front. Theirs is down the bottom. And the male's genitalia are similar to those of canids, which is quite interesting as well. So very interesting animal these guys are. So let's see if we can find the male. Let's see if we can look at the male. Is he running around being fun? That's the baby. So you can see that's the kind of the colours of the baby looks like. We'll talk about him a bit later. Let's see if we can find the male. Where is he? He's got to be in here somewhere. Oh, there he is. He's kind of T-posing. Look at you. Hello, buddy. All right. The ii is a nocturnal and arboreal animal, meaning it spends most of its life high in the trees. Although they are common, or they are known to come down to the ground on occasion, they typically sleep, eat, travel, and mate in the trees, and are most commonly found in the canopy, where there's plenty of cover in the dense vegetation. During the day, ii sleep in spherical nests in the forks of trees, that are constructed out of leaves, branches, and vines, before emerging after dark as they begin to hunt for food. Iis are solitary animals and mark their large home ranges with scents. The smaller territories of females often overlap with the territories of at least a couple males, and male iis tend to share their territories with other males, and are even known to share some nests, although not the same at the same time, and they seemingly tolerate each other until they hear the call of a female that is looking to mate. So in terms of babies, let's have a look at these guys. Diets and foraging. There we go. So talk about the babies. Oh, that's not what I wanted to look at. Let's have a look at the babies though. There's one little baby there. So mating season extends throughout the year, with females typically starting to breed at 3 or 4 years of age. They give birth to 1 offspring every 2 to 3 years. During this period of parenting, the female becomes a dominant finger over males, likely to secure better access for food while caring for her young. And the infant remains in the nest for up to 2 months before venturing out, but takes another 7 months before the young aya can actually maneuver in the canopy as skillfully as an adult. So in terms of diet and foraging, these guys are omnivores and commonly feed on seeds, nuts, fruits, nectar, plants, fungi, but also wood-boring insect larvae, and honey. So quite an interesting diet. Eyes tap the trunks of trees and branches at the rate of up to 8 times per second and listens to the echo produced to find hollow chambers. Studies have also suggested that the acoustic properties associated with the foraging cavity have no effect on excavation behavior. So they're actually really cool. That's a form of echolocation, and they're the only primate that does that, which is another very interesting too. Once a chamber is found, they chew a hole in the wood and get the grub out of the hole using their highly adapted narrow and bony middle finger. The eye begins foraging between 30 minutes before and 3 hours after sunset. Up to 80% of the night is spent foraging in the canopy, separated by occasional rest periods. It climbs a tree by making successive vertical leaps, much like a squirrel, and horizontal movement is much more difficult though, but they rarely descend and jump from another tree, and often can travel up to 4 kilometers a night. Though foraging is usually solitary, they occasionally forage in groups. Individual movements within the groups are coordinated using both vocalizations and scent signals. And throughout the wet season, the eye is known to spend up to 20% of its time feeding on the nectar of Valvanetta madagascarensis, another homininae that is the only known primate to possess the A294V mutation for encoding of an alcohol dehydrous class V enzyme, which is known to increase its efficiency. So very interesting, a great example of convergent evolution. The study a 2016 study actually showed the eyes are able to differentiate between different alcohol concentrations in nectar and show a clear preference for ones of higher concentrations. So basically, they like to drink and they like alcohol, like people do. And this suggests that in the wild, they're actually likely to consume fermented nectar, and they have the ability to metabolize alcohol. That actually would have given them an advantage, which I think is quite funny. So in terms of their social systems, they are considered solitary and have not been, though they have not been exhumed to group each other. However, some recent research is actually suggesting they're a lot more social than we thought. It usually sticks to foraging on its own personal home range, and the home range of males overlap, and the males can be very social. Female home ranges never overlap, though the male's home range can often overlap with those of several females. A male eye can live in a large area of up to 32 hectares, or about 80 acres, while females live in smaller ones. They go up to about 8.1 hectares, about 20 acres. It's difficult for the males to defend a singular female because of their large home ranges. They seem to exhibit polygamy because of this, and regular scent marking with their cheeks and neck is how eyes let each other know their presence and repel intruders from their territory. And like many other prosimians or other lemurs, it's the female that's actually the dominant one, not the male. It is not typically monogamous and will often challenge each other for mates, and male eyes are very assertive in this way and sometimes even pull other males away from females during mating. Males are also normally locked to females during mating, and sessions may up to last an hour, very similar to a dog, as we talked before. Outside of mating, males and females interact only occasionally, usually while foraging, and the eye is thought to be the only primate that uses echolocation to find its food. Kind of already mentioned that. In terms of habitat, the eye lives primarily in the east coast of Madagascar. Its natural habitat is rainforest or dry deciduous forest, but may live in cultivated areas due to deforestation. Rainforest eyes are more common though, dwell in canopy areas about 70 meters in altitude, and they sleep during the day in nests built from interwoven twigs and leaves, and the canopy among the vines and branches. So we kind of talked about that before. Very, very cool mod. I'm really big fan of this one. So this has a very interesting story. The eye was actually thought extinct in 1933, but was rediscovered in 1957. In 1966, 9 individuals were transported to Nosumambe, to an island near Masanenta off eastern Madagascar. But recent research showed the eye was more widespread than previously thought, but its conservation status has changed to endangered in 2014. And this is for 4 big main reasons. The eye is considered evil by local cultures and is killed as such. The forests of Madagascar are declining due to deforestation. Local farmers will kill eyes to protect their crops, and eye poaching is another main issue. But there is no direct evidence suggests that eye pose any legitimate threat to crops, and it's all based on superstition. So this is a great example of how people's beliefs and superstitions are impacting conservation, because they believe these guys are quite you know, demons and stuff like that, but really they're just little guys just trying to find food for themselves. So they are considered a harbinger of death and evil, and are killed on sight. Though others believe if one points his narrowest finger at someone, they are marked for death. So if they point at you, you're marked for death. Some say that the appearance of the eye in a village predicts the death of a villager, and the only way to prevent this is to kill it. The Salvakta people go so far as to claim eye sneak into homes through thatched roofs and murder the sleeping occupants using the middle finger to puncture their victim's aorta, which is very much not true. But, you know, superstitions are superstitions, and that obviously costs eye lives, and we want to get rid of that. We don't want to do that anymore. But there is also captive breeding. So the conservation of the species has been aided by captive breeding, primarily by the Duke Lemur Center in Durham, North Carolina. And the species has been influential in keeping, researching, and breeding eye-eyes in all of the species of lemurs, including how they develop through infancy. They have also been revolutionized the understanding of the eye-eyes diet. Jersey Zoo in the United Kingdom has also played a big role in the conservation of these species, and after importing 6 eye-eyes from the wild in 1990, achieved the world's first captive breeding of eye-eyes in 1992. And they are kept internationally in an international stud book of species managed by the European Species Breeding Program. So, another very cool species. Another great cakes mod. A very big fan. So I think this would be a great place to finish off the video. So I'd like to thank Scott for both the frogs. I'd like to thank Great Cakes Mods for the Prototaxites, the ass, the mammoth, and the eye. And also Leaf for making that beautiful Jimothy. Very, very big fan of that. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember the little bell icon to get notified below anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.